Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for February 2nd, 2023. I want you to listen to what the headline is on the online version of Defense One, a pro-military publication that put out today the following alert. Big capital letters, alert. We don't have the missiles to stop China. That's its headline. And what's the problem they're describing? They say we need more weapons and more money for Ukraine, but there are calls coming from analysts, from congressmen, from defense officials that are arguing that we must increase spending for sophisticated long-range missiles that are going to be needed for the coming war we're going to fight in the Indo-Pacific. We need more. Now, they go on to talk about this, and let me tell you that one of the things you should look at in this is the comments from U.S. General Minahan, who said last week that we are probably going to be at war with China by 2025. And in the back of the minds of many of these so-called analysts and military officials and others is that we have to hurry up because we're behind in our preparation for this war. We need to rebuild weapons stockpiles. Why are we short of weapons? Because we're sending everything to Ukraine. We need to build new B-21 bombers. We need to establish bases throughout the Indo-Pacific to build up a global NATO. And we have to ramp up missile production, but that is expected to take 2 or more years. So do the math. 2 years from now is 2025. Are we prepared for a war in 2025? Now, what can we do? We're already spending over $800 billion officially a year on defense policy. So here's a solution for you. How about trying diplomacy? How about negotiations? How about trying to resolve problems through mutual cooperation as opposed to lies and recriminations? As of now, there are no channels between NATO and Russia. There are, as far as we know, scant effort to establish new channels between Russia and the United States. There was a report the other day that Secretary of State Blinken communicated a message to Russian Foreign Secretary Lavrov through the Egyptian Foreign Minister. And he basically said something like, according to the reports, if you stop the war, if you cut it out, we can solve all the problems. Well, why not get on the phone and talk about it? What's holding it all back? So when you look at this, you see what the deeper problem is. There was no consideration given to the security concerns raised by Russian President Putin for at least 8 years, going back to the 2014 February coup in Ukraine. But even before that, the discussion of bringing Georgia and Ukraine into NATO, the idea that you can move NATO forces and arms to the Russian border while you're supposedly talking to Russia about being a partner with the West. Then on top of that, you have the lies about no NATO expansion, the lies about working together with the Minsk Accord to end the killing of Ukrainians of Russian descent in the Donbas region. Lies after lies. There's no trust. How do you build trust? Well, what we're seeing is much of the global South is turning away from the Western order, the Anglo-American order, the transatlantic, whatever you want to call it, the unipolar order. And why is that the case? Is it Russian propaganda? Are the Russians and the Chinese so good at propaganda that they're winning these gullible Africans and Asians away from the unipolar order? No, it's actually very simple. These are countries that have, in many cases, a colonial past. They're familiar with what the British Empire was, what the Portuguese Empire, the Belgian Empire, the French Empire. They know what it's like to live under conditions where you have the International Monetary Fund dictating to your government that you can't spend money on food or hospitals or transportation because you must pay the debt first. and the debt has accumulated while your nation's raw materials are being looted. So under these conditions, if you reject that, you get hit with sanctions, you get hit with coups and wars. This is neocolonialism. And Helga Zepp-LaRouche has been pointing out that the global south is being led by nations that are part of the former non-aligned movement from the late 1950s and early 60s, when the idea was that you don't have to choose between the Soviet bloc and the Western bloc, but you can achieve an alternative pathway toward development. But that was cut off. And the Vietnam War was a key part of that. The collapse of the Bretton Woods system was part of that. And the imposition of International Monetary Fund policy through the 1970s to the present has left countries deeper in debt with less to show for it. That's why the Global South doesn't trust people like Blinken or Biden or Macron. Macron went to France, went from France rather to French West Africa and got a bad reception. Schultz just went to Brazil and Argentina and was shocked to find that they weren't interested in what he had to sell, namely green policy. These countries want development. They want partners that will help them with investments in physical production. And what are they getting from the West? They're being told, you have to support our sanctions against Russia. You have to support the Anglo-Americans who are trying to defend the people of Ukraine. Well, they don't believe it. They know that wars have been fought supposedly to defend freedom, for example, Iraq or Libya or Syria. And what was the result? The destruction of the country. What was the result in Afghanistan? The destruction of the country, the impoverishment of millions. And so these pleas for support are falling on deaf ears. You have Lula, for example, who's now talking about a G20 for peace, what he called a peace club. You have governments in Europe now, Austria, Hungary, Croatia, warning of the danger of nuclear war and saying no more weapons to Ukraine. Growing numbers of people in the streets in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe. They're facing conditions of hunger, of poverty, joblessness, a sense of real depression. And the idea of building new weapons systems for the next war is not a solution. It's not an economic solution. So this Saturday, you can join us and hear leading officials from the US, from China, from Europe, from South America, from Africa, engaging in in-depth, serious discussion of how to establish a new security architecture which takes into consideration the legitimate security concerns of all sovereign nations and the building of a new development architecture which also takes into consideration the desires for nations to establish a capability where they can live as sovereign nations and care for their people and then participate in a community of principle with other nations. This is not hopium. This is wisdom. This is an idea that was there with the founding fathers of the United States. It goes back longer than that. It's the great religions are founded on this principle of love thy neighbor, of act for the mutual benefit of all peoples. Now, what's the option to this? Watching Boris Johnson run roughshod all over the world, begging for weapons for Ukraine? I mean, what is he doing? Campaigning to become the king of Ukraine? Looking for a place to go into exile before he gets thrown into prison in Britain? The option is war, and the danger of nuclear war continues to grow as long as there are people calling for more weapons and more war. So we presented, through Mrs. LaRouche, fundamental principles for achieving a new strategic and development architecture. It's win-win based on mutual benefits through cooperation. This is something that could be worked out with China, something that could be worked out with Russia, something that could be worked out with Iran, with any country in the world, without having to go to war to impose a unipolar order. So register for our conference Saturday. Help us build the numbers of people who can come and participate in the discussion. And this is the way we're going to break out of the otherwise insane panic over whether we have enough weapons to wipe out the human race. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow.